Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. Thank you for your patience. Hello, everybody. On behalf of Paraclete Press, welcome to this webinar with Khris Ford and Kim Langley on grief brain, ambiguity, and hope. I'm Sister Estelle. We are so grateful to be able to gather with all of you during this time of separation. A recording of today's presentation will be available later to share with anyone who couldn't join us, and we'll also let you know how to get a copy of their books and DVDs with Paraclete Press. Throughout this presentation, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions or post any comments for Khris and Kim, and we will get to these in the last 15 minutes of this hour. Please open your chat bar. That's also located at the bottom of your screen, and we can keep you updated with links and other information. As you know, today, Khris Ford and Kim Langley will be speaking to us about grief brain, ambiguity, and hope. And I'd love to introduce these two amazing women to you. Khris Ford has dedicated the last 30 years of her life to the work of supporting those who are experiencing grief and trauma. Khris believes passionately in the transformative potential of grief. Fueled by her own experiences of the death of her teenage son, Stephen, and more recently, her husband, John, Khris founded the Austin Center for Grief and Loss in Austin, Texas. She has created and given many grief retreats for bereaved parents, as well as other losses, and trained hundreds of counselors, spiritual directors, and social workers in how to guide grieving adults through a transforming grief process. Today, Khris lives in North Carolina, where she serves as the director of the North Carolina Institute for Spiritual Direction and Formation. Welcome, Khris. Kim Langley is president of Life Balance Enterprises with 20 years of experience as a retreat leader, spiritual director, coach, and trainer. In her first book with Paraclete, Send My Roots Rain, Kim offers comfort and encouragement to those struggling with the recent loss or grief, helping them find language for complex emotions and open their hearts through poetry. She lives with her husband in Lakewood, Ohio. And welcome to you, Kim. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Estelle.
We're so glad to be here this afternoon, and thank you all for taking the time to join us. I want to begin this afternoon by reminding us that during these days, our bodies are carrying immense amounts of stress, and perhaps we haven't even noticed that. We become so accustomed to carrying it in that way that we don't notice. So I want us to begin with taking a moment to just remind our bodies of what it feels like to relax. So I want to invite you into a comfortable position to really notice the support that's beneath your sit bones and your feet, to let yourself sort of sink into that support. And as you close your eyes very gently, focus on relaxing your legs and your shoulders and your hands and your jaw and your eyes, and just settle into these moments. Notice your breathing, not in a way to try to change it, but simply to notice the air coming in and the air going out. The air coming in and the air going out. And to offer thanksgiving for the ability to breathe freely. Take a moment to notice what it feels like to be in your body in these moments. Feel the support. Still attentive to your breathing. Take a moment to connect with the world outside yourself. Offer to all of creation a blessing of beauty and healing. A blessing that all may be at ease, knowing the support of a love that holds of creation. And when you are ready, very slowly and gently, open your eyes and join us.
Hi, everybody. I'm having a moment. And Estelle or Katie, you might be able to assist me. Because for some reason, I can't find the share screen. There it is.
Right at the bottom. There you go.
It just wasn't popping up. It was hidden because I had it minimized. Okay. Thanks for your patience, everybody. We're all learning how to do this for the first time. Okay. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, it's great.
Okay, good. So, and you can see the full screen, not just the slides on the side. Okay.
There we go.
Khris and I wanted to start with this cartoon because one of our main takeaways is that this time of separation is a time of grief, and it's not easy being grieved. So we want to be gentle with ourselves, which is one of the reasons that we wanted to start with open hands and quiet time. This is a gift that we need to give ourselves. We're asking a lot of ourselves right now, and we need to give ourselves extra time to recover. So Khris, you wanted to talk to us a little bit about grief in general, why so many of us are feeling anxious and waking up 3 or 4 times a night and so on. Would you just say a little bit about the textures and colors?
Yes.
Oops.
We'll try to get Khris. You want to fill in a little bit, Kim?
Yes. I'm not sure, Khris. Maybe Khris, have you unmuted yourself? It's a tricky thing. Down at the bottom. There you go. Okay, so we're Take it away, my friend.
All right, we're gonna get this started, you guys. All right.
This is going to be a great webinar. We're off to a good start.
Okay.
We're the
so-
dynamic duo in training.
Whoa.
Refreshing.
Okay. I want to start with a quote from one of my very favorite books by Francis Weller, entitled The Wild Edge of Sorrow. Sorrow is a sustained note in the song of being alive. To be human is to know loss in its many forms. This should not be seen as a depressing truth. Acknowledging this reality enables us to find our way into the grace that lies hidden in sorrow. We are most alive at the threshold between love and revelation. Every loss ultimately opens the way for a new encounter.
Makes sense.
Grief is a sustained note, and we are learning that perhaps more than ever in these days that seem to go on, and the days that we don't know when they're going to end. It's certainly an experience of global grief that is both deeply personal and vastly collective. It will not be ended in a nice, neat, tidy package like we'd like it to be. No, grief's journey is not toward an endpoint, but rather toward a point of integration. When people talk about resolving grief or healing grief, part of me wants to cringe, because I know from 29 years since my son died that those words don't fit for me. They don't fit. Integration fits for me.
Yeah.
It's living into what has been offered to us, even as we are feeling about things being taken away. It's living into that which has been offered to us. Grief offers us choices. As Elizabeth Lesser says, we can relax and float in the direction that the water flows, or we can swim hard against it. And I bet we've all done that.
Yeah.
If we go with the river, and I love this phrase, if we go with the river, the energy of 1,000 mountain streams will be with us.
Love that.
If we go with the river. In other words, if we allow ourselves to grieve,
Yeah.
to feel the grief. And it's not a choice that you just make one time.
Right.
You're making it hour by hour and day by day, because grief comes in layers.
Yeah.
It comes in layers, it unfolds. It's not like, thank heavens, no, all of what is to come, all in one fell swoop. If it did, I would be salt. I would have dissolved. Thank heavens I didn't. So we have so many layers, so many losses. I know that you that are listening understand this, because we've lost vacations and we've lost graduations the way we thought they would be, and beautiful perfected wedding plans and planned birthday parties. We've lost a sense of safety and our ability to predict a future. We've lost hugs and close-up encounters with friends and family. We've lost jobs. And with that comes a perceived loss of identity and a perceived loss of being able to offer something to the world. And of course, we grieve the deaths of so many that we knew so well, and even many more whose names we do not even know. And with that, we grieve the loss of long-held traditions around death, wakes and funerals, and times to come together and tell stories, and so much more that cannot happen, at least right now.
Yeah.
So many of layers of grief. And underneath all of those layers are the cumulative losses of things that have happened to us and that we have grieved throughout our life. We're grieving those remnants because we're not finished.
Yeah.
And this reminds us of it. When we give ourselves to healthy processes of grief, we are such witnesses to our children and to our families and to our friends. We proclaim with our tears and our stories what Francis Weller has said so beautifully, that grief is akin to praise. Think about that. Grief is akin to praise. It's how the soul recounts the depth to which we have loved something or someone, the depth to which something or someone has touched us. And so when we grieve, we proclaim that, and others are witness to that. So Kim, we're surrounded by all these layers of grief, layers of grief that we share with the world, but how do we keep up that energy and hope day to day in the middle of all this?
Yeah, so I want to talk, we both want to talk a little bit about resilience today, because I agree completely with all that Khris has just said about needing to honor grief. And when I was working on my book, I interviewed a lot of individual grievers and chaplains and clergy and spiritual directors and social workers and therapists. And I always ended with the same question: what's the one thing you think people should know, or what's the one thing you know now that you didn't know when your grief began? And many of them said the same thing: do the work. You have to lean into the grief enough so that you're not stuffing it, or you're honoring it, and so on. And I love that quote about the streams in the mountain. And at the same time, not but and at the same time, we have to give ourselves a break, a big break, in the form of self-compassion, because grief work is like taking on a part-time job. Now, those of you who are homeschooling your kids unexpectedly know exactly what I'm talking about, because you have taken on that part-time job as well. And so, anything worth doing is worth doing badly at first. And we should probably expect that we feel confused about how to grieve this very novel situation. Whatever we feel right now is a normal response to a very abnormal situation. And you can't do everything, and you certainly can't do everything right. So you start again the next day, and you just try to learn from any mistakes or meltdowns and do better. So self-compassion is just a huge piece. And I'm maybe preaching to the choir of myself here, because I'm pretty much a ducks in a row girl. I like to plan ahead, and I like things organized. And since the sky fell in on us a couple weeks ago, I can't even find my ducks sometimes, let alone keep the ducks in a row. So I have to keep reminding myself that this is a marathon, not a sprint. That resilience requires self-compassion over and over and over, just like doing grief work requires the choice to do that work over and over again. And that our brains are really kind of stuck in the caveman days in a lot of ways. We expect a lot of ourselves, and yet at the same time, our brains are very heavily wired for fear. And so I put these 2 blue ribbons into our presentation, because sometimes you just have to give yourself the blue ribbon for putting on your pants and acting like an adult. If we used to get 5 to 6 things done a day, we might get 2 or 1 or 3 done now. And but the thing is, we can train our brains to be more hopeful. And this is actually a golden opportunity to train our own brains, because we have that emotional brain that I heard a talk recently from a neurologist who was responding to what brains do during a pandemic. And he said, your brain has never really encountered a pandemic before. It's not real sure what to do. And it keeps cycling through fight, flight, freeze, which is exhausting. Okay, that's the bad news. The good news, though, is that we aren't only our emotional brain, we're also our thinking brain. And our thinking brain can argue with our emotional brain. It can dialogue with it. And when we hear ourselves, getting on the runaway freight train of fear, which is very easy for me to do, we can say, wait a minute, slow down. I know you're the part of my brain that's trying to keep me scared. Brains are actually quite shameless in manufacturing scary thoughts for us, because in the cave person days, it kept you safe. Having fearful thoughts often made you cautious, and that kept you safe. And so we're heavily wired for it. But when we recognize with our thinking brains our unreasonable negative thoughts, or that we've really gone down the rabbit hole, one of the things I do is say to myself, and how's that working for you? You know, are you feeling better or worse? Is this going to get you where you want to go? Like with your pants on and hopeful and doing some things, or is this going to really suck you down? And you know what the answer to that is. So those are a few thoughts on how we can work with our own brains in order to give ourselves credit, be self-compassionate, and, you know, grow our optimism abilities.
And you know what you just said about the brain and your conversation, that part of yourself, moms and dads, that's a wonderful thing to do with your children. Ask them, what's that part of you that's feeling really negative right now saying?
Right.
And what would you like to say back to it? Kids love that. They bite right onto it. So give them that opportunity to recognize they do have parts of self that speak, and they are able to make a choice which one they want to listen to. That's wonderful.
Well, and the hard part, if I might add, is that grief brain is real, and we don't always want to tell our kids that, because we think if we acknowledge their frightened or cranky feelings, we'll make them worse. But in fact, we know from the research that the opposite is true. If we acknowledge how they feel and then point them in a different direction, they do way better. So one of the things I say to my kids is, what does the wise person inside tell you about that? And they'll be amazing sometimes, won't they, Khris? The things they come up to when you keep reminding them that there's a wise person inside them that knows how to handle this. And then if they say, well, I don't know what my wise person inside is, then you can say, well, can we talk about it? I have a few ideas, you know, and so on. So that's where the coaching with permission comes in.
Right.
Both Khris and I thought it was important to include this, that we want grief to be like a straight line between 2 points, you know, moving along in a linear way. And that's why I loved what you said, Khris, about, you know, resolution or healing. Like sometime you're done. I don't resist the words healing if people want to use that. You know, we don't really have adequate language for this process, in my view. But
No.
Our point is that the way grief actually works looks a lot more like the image on the right of your screen. And that not only research shows that, but probably your own experience tells you that one moment you're doing great, you know, you're making dinner, or you're in good space, or you're playing Monopoly with the family, or you're Zooming with a friend. And then the next minute you just want to take a 2-hour nap, you know, and it's hard to control all that. And we'd like to be able to control it, but that's not how it goes a lot of times.
Amen.
So Khris, would you talk to us a little bit about ambiguous loss and how, you know, the research on ambiguous loss can inform us about what we're all experiencing now, why we're waking up at night, and there's a kind of gloom over us sometimes.
Right. And I love the fact that we were able to find this really wonderful picture of fog, because that's what the experience of ambiguous loss is like. It's like walking in a fog. It's a loss that's hard to see and touch and sometimes even name. I think of my experience of ambiguous loss today in this way. I'm walking around in and with a world that has a background of wallpaper that's grief, but it's just a background, you know, and it's impacting, it's shadowing, it's fogging everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even I was noticing today when I took my walk that I didn't even see any faces because people had on masks.
Right.
So there
and good
is
for them, but
yeah, good for them, but my need to see a face is really awful there.
right.
So we're living, when we're talking about ambiguous loss, I want to give you a couple of examples because there are a couple of types of ambiguous loss. One example would be that if you were living with someone, for example, with dementia or mental illness,
Yeah.
you're living with ambiguous grief. And that is because you experience the physical presence of that person with you. However, emotionally and psychologically, they are not with you, at least in the way that you have known them before.
Right.
Another example of the other kind of ambiguous grief is If you are divorced or separated or estranged in a relationship, we have that experience of psychological presence because that person's way of being with you is still impacting you and moving through you, though they are not with you physically.
Right.
And in many ways, what is going on today is that we are having an experience that is emotionally and psychologically very present, but we can't touch it and see it. It's just there.
Right.
The expert in this field is Pauline Boss. That's Boss. And she is really the leader in grief. And she offers us 6 guidelines for living and moving through these experiences of ambiguous grief. And I'm going to go through them pretty quickly and invite you to think about them. We'll talk about them a little more as we talk about examples in a minute. First of all is to find what's going on. And we do this all the time without even thinking about it. We make up a story to help us understand what's happening. Mm-hmm. Now, the kind of meaning finding that's helpful are stories that really do and positivity and legacy to this kind of a loss. And so that's what we mean when we talk about finding meaning. We also have to adjust our expectations for mastery. Kim spoke to that a little bit earlier. You know, we're just not going to be masters of grief. Nobody masters grief. Sorry. We're all going to be rookies, and we're all going to be rookies each and every time because it's a new experience and a new relationship. But what we want to focus on in it is what we can control rather than those things that we cannot control.
Right.
Third, we need to think about identity and reconstructing identity. Identity is one of those things in grief that changes so much, and we don't even recognize that's what's happening.
Yeah.
But even today, as you moms and dads are staying at home and you need to be teachers, that's not your identity. That's not who you've been, I don't think, for most of us anyway. Perhaps you're an engineer or a housekeeper or a plumber, whatever your normal identity is, it's different. And you're not going to master that new identity because it is new. And hopefully we're not going to be doing this forever. And so just allowing it to be what it is and doing the best you can. Fourthly, we need to normalize what's going on. I think we resist doing that because we'd like to think this is the last day I'm going to have to do this. So I don't need to normalize it. But reality is telling us that, at least in this pandemic, that it's healthy for us to say, okay, this is the new normal. And I need to settle into that instead of pushing back against it. It's a lot of wasted energy to do that. Mm-hmm. Fifthly, we need to revive attachments to certain things and certain ways of doing things. For example, family dinners may look a lot like what you're doing today, looking at a screen and enjoying a meal from your place and them enjoying a meal from another place. We really have to let go of the way we think things have to be in order to enjoy pieces of what we're doing today. And sixth, and maybe most importantly, we have to find hope. We have to open our eyes and our ears to hope. And that means that we may find it in places where we've never found it before. And that's the wonder and the awe and the joy and surprise in all of this, I think. But those are the ways that we work through this sort of foggy image you're seeing in order to find more clarity.
Thank you, Khris.
Yeah. Anything else you'd add to that, Kim?
Well, I would say that both of us wanted to talk a little bit about practical strategies for reminding ourselves of this hope. And one of the, maybe we can both talk about this, Khris. One of the things we agreed helps us and many is creating a little sacred space to honor whatever you're going through now. Before pandemic, I would do this to reflect the seasons or a holiday, Advent, Easter, whatever holidays you celebrate. So this picture in front of you is one that Khris suggested, and I love it because I could see taking buttons and making each button represent something with your kids, like these are my friends I miss from school, or these are my friends I miss from daycare. And these are the good times we'll have again when this is over. And this big button represents me being willing to stay home in order to keep others safe. It should be very positive. You know, kids have a lot of fears that they don't necessarily tell us about. So we do have to watch what we say in front of them. We want to be truthful with them, but we also don't want to scare the heck out of them or make them afraid to go out or to go back to school or daycare eventually. So we can do these real positive things, creating a little space, maybe on their dresser or on our dining room table or sideboard. And they can remind us of intentions, prayers, or hopes. And then we can change it up. You know, if this is a marathon, not a sprint. So after a week or two of your heart-shaped buttons, you might want to create some kind of a sacred corner in their room or in your room. This is a really simple way to do it. You just take your favorite chair and you put headphones for meditation on them, and there's a little chiming bowl, singing bowl next to it. You know, it can be very simple. Here's another example of just a little sacred space where you stake out a few inches or feet of space where you're intentional about relaxing there or praying there or meditating there. Any flat surface can become a home altar, and you can use objects like these stones here to represent intentions, family members, hopes. I know my sister-in-law did this, and she put out a stone for each one of her brothers and sisters and their families, and she would touch each stone as she held them in love.
Yeah.
You know. So, Khris, do you want to say a little bit about this kind of a sacred space? Or I'm gonna, in a second, we're gonna talk about art. So why don't you take it from here?
Well, I think as Kim said, I think these sacred spaces can be as simple as a book and a pair of glasses to read, or can be a more innate, maybe where you have photographs of people that are important to you, memorabilia from maybe something special that someone has given to you. I love having a book, a poetry book, maybe that's important, or scriptures, the Torah, whatever might be open, to invite you into those, or just to invite you to remember the words that are there that are important to you. Yeah.
I love that.
So one of the other things I've thought about is that art is just an incredible way for all ages to have an opportunity to let what's inside here and maybe really about to burst out of us in a good way or not so good a way, to put it out here in a very concrete way through painting or sculpting or any way that allows us. Oh, mandalas are just wonderful ways to express, and without having to even think about it, just allowing yourself to move into that in a very meditative, sort of contemplative way. One of the things that I've done with children when they've had a number of losses in their life, and this time would be a time to do that, is to take construction paper strips like you do for a chain, and everybody writes something on that chain as to what they experienced as lost. And then when everybody's done, you put it together and it makes something of beauty.
Ah, what a lovely idea.
So you talk about, yeah, the pain and the sadness and what we've lost is very real. And what is also real is that there are some good things that have come about in our time together that make our time beautiful. And so we can transform painful things into things that can be beautiful.
You could hang them on a branch. I know a chaplain in a hospital here in Cleveland, and she had the staff hang their painful experiences or thoughts or fears on little pieces of paper, and then they hung them from a branch that they stood up in a coffee can. And then later they put like flowers and things to help them remember that it's all very bittersweet.
Oh, I love that.
Isn't it a super idea? And that we wouldn't feel this grief if we hadn't known love and appreciation and so on. So just talk to us a little bit about other kinds of beauty, how we can savor beauty as a restorative practice during this time.
I love being able to go for a walk and really being intentional about noticing things that have been there all the 10 or 15 times I've walked, but I didn't see it because I wasn't paying attention. And so one of the things with children that you can do is say, let's see if we can find 5 different shapes of leaves.
Oh, that's nice.
Let's see if we can find 6 different colors of things
Yeah.
or 4 different kinds of birds, to really tune in both ourselves and our children to what is around us in beauty. There is no more powerful antidote to trauma and to the acute grief than beauty. And we
Hmm.
can find it in nature, and we can find it in music, and we can find it in art. We can find it in creatures that we see, these lovely little creatures that make us laugh and maybe even have to make up a story and conversation with at this point.
Yes.
So I just, if we can just take in the beauty and soak it in, it's pretty hard to also hold on to the darkness when you're filling your eyes with something like this.
Right, right. And if we do take children, or, we don't presume everyone on the webinar has a family, this is a good thing to do for ourselves too.
Absolutely.
Some years back, I had a mentor who teased me about being as serious as a heart attack. And their prescription for my spiritual growth was grow a funny bone, which I've now been working on for about 30 years. And one of the things that mentor asked me is, what do you do when you go for a walk? And I realized I was ruminating on the badness of things, kind of rehearsing my worries. And now when I walk, I look up, I look at the architectural details. I look at my neighbor's daffodils. I pay attention to a bird. Those worries are still there when you come back from your walk. So it's okay to set them aside and be joyful either by yourself or right alongside your kids. You look for 4 birds too.
That's exactly
Right?
exactly right. We have to do that coming back and forth between grief work and restorative work, and
Yes.
grief work and restorative work,
Yes.
and give ourselves that break. No guilt, no
Right.
blame, no guilt. It's okay to do that. We can be much more present to all of it if we give
Right.
each side a chance.
Well, I think I mentioned when we did our other webinar on Tuesday that my husband gave me a sweatshirt when we were raising kids, and it said, "When mama ain't happy, no one ain't happy." And that was his oh so tactful way, which I appreciated actually, of reminding that we have to take care of ourselves first. The family, our friends, everyone we love and influence can kind of smell our moods, and moods are very contagious. So it's not that we're not real, I'm not saying put on a happy
Right,
face. That's
right.
unhelpful either. But we can definitely influence our own moods and the moods of others by making, courage out of our fear, making hope out of our anxiety. People who have courage are not afraid. They're afraid too.
They
They
just
just,
they just choose to move through it.
exactly. So hope is healthy. That's one of the messages that we hope to go away from. And where are we going from here now, Khris? I have to look at my
I
notes.
wanted to share just one last thing in terms of this ambiguous loss, and
Please
because
do.
I know it's true, and I'm hearing this from parents that their kids are angry. They're
Ah,
angry that they've missed out on things that were really important to them at the end of the
sure.
school year. And
Yeah.
so I think it's important for us to normalize no matter what we're feeling, and not just our kids, but ourselves too.
Sure.
To normalize, it's okay to be angry.
Yeah.
That's not selfish.
Right.
And with children, one of the ways to help them express that is to do physical things with them. That
Yeah.
releases that angry energy. You can do art things where they create something that represents this silent thing that we call COVID-19.
Yeah.
Make this structure and then let them destroy it.
Right.
Let them destroy it.
Exactly.
It's
Or
just
bury it, or put it in the
exactly.
freezer. Put it in a bag and put it in the freezer.
Absolutely. Transform it into something beautiful,
Mhm.
But we just need to acknowledge that it doesn't matter what we're feeling. It's okay. This is an extraordinary situation, and it's okay for us to have an extraordinary number of different feelings and
It
to
is. And
acknowledge those to one another.
I feel for anyone who has teenagers right now, because have so much trouble with moodiness and self-regulation anyway. Not all of them and not all the time, but it's a normal developmental stage. And I'm remembering that I had a colleague once who was a therapist with teens, and often he would say to them, let's do our session today walking, go, or just go get your coat. Because sometimes they'd be like, nah, just go get your coat. Well, I'm going to get you a Coke, or whatever. And they'd walk to the McDonald's, and the madder the kid was, the faster they would walk. That was such a beautiful outlet that therapist was giving those kids, And his big message was always, all feelings are appropriate, not all actions are.
Exactly.
Right? So yes, you can feel as angry as you want, but don't curse at me. Yes, you can talk about angry feelings, but please maintain your respect for the rest of the family as well as you can.
That's right.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Khris. I think that's important.
Chris and Kim, a quick question from one
Yes.
of the attendees. They said, could you say a couple more times slowly? You had a phrase, make courage out of, make hope out of our anxieties.
Yeah, I think make courage out of your fear and make hope out of your anxiety. And it's not a quote, it's just the acknowledgement, although make a great sign on the refrigerator,
Right.
that even people who we think of as very courageous are afraid too. They just make a different choice about how to act on their fear. I remember hearing Nelson Mandela, who of course was unjustly imprisoned for over 20 years, saying that there were times when he was on Robben Island, he just wanted to lie down. And I bet he did lie down for brief periods sometimes. And then he would recite to himself a poem called Invictus, which you might want to look at. It's marvelous. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And then he'd get back up. And that's how you make courage out of fear, Is that helpful? I hope.
I think it is. Thank you so much.
And Estelle, I think we're getting pretty close to being ready for, maybe have a couple of other slides, but close to being ready for questions.
We are.
In a few more minutes. That'd be great.
People should put their questions in so that we have them. And I want to give Khris the credit for this idea, because she said another thing we should think about, in addition to physical activity like running and so on, is simple things like gardening with your child. I love this photo. And that I threw in, I'm the research maven here. So I threw in that there was a long-term happiness study conducted in the UK that found that small changes, even simple activities like gardening, and some people only cared for a single plant, but they reported that they felt better after they had been doing that.
That's right.
So maybe this pandemic will transform us into a nation of gardeners. That would not be a bad thing. And let's see what else, Khris. Oh, yes, this is such a beautiful point, Khris. Please talk to us a little bit about how journaling or meditation can help, and your 3 key questions that your clients have found so helpful.
So journaling for me has really been an anchor for years and years and years, just to help me take from inside here and put it out here. And I'm amazed at what comes out sometimes. And I go back and I think, did I really write that? Yes, I did. But one of the things I did, especially after my son died, was to focus on these 3 questions, which Dr. John Schneider came up with as a way of thinking about the grief journey, that initially we focus on the things we've lost. And we're just immersed in that.
Of course.
We can hardly think about anything else. And then in time and in process, and I want to emphasize process, not time.
Right.
We begin to focus on what is left and are able to see that there are things that haven't been totally distorted in our life. And then eventually, in a long time of processing, we begin to look at what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the legacies of this experience and my relationship with the person or the whatever it is that has been lost.
Right.
And so when you journal all the time using those questions, it's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful story.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Khris, you asked me to say a little bit about why people are so jumpy right now. Let's do that very quickly. we were talking about how both of our adult children are harping on us about wearing masks and wearing gloves and not going out. And it can become tedious, right? It's like a reversal of when they were teenagers and we'd say, where are you going? What are you going to do while you're out? Now they're doing it to us, right? But what we realized, and we thought it might be useful to say, is that a lot of people find it hard to name their fears. So they're just blurting them out in these bossy, cautionary exhortations. But what we should read into that is love. You know, that people are worried about their elders. They're worried about their loved ones and neighbors and friends who have compromising health situations. And so what might come off as bossy, well, somebody said it very well. What love looks like right now is an empty stadium. What love looks like right now is people 6 feet apart in the park, you know, closed playgrounds. That's what love looks like right now. And so I wanted to offer this thing that has lifted me up many times from Elizabeth Gilbert, a writer. Some of you may recognize her name. She wrote an open letter to fear. And in it, she says, fear, I recognize and respect that you are part of this family, but still, your suggestions will never be followed. You're not allowed to touch the road maps. You're not allowed to suggest detours. You're not allowed to fiddle with the temperature. Dude, you're not even allowed to touch the radio. But above all else, my dear old familiar friend, you are absolutely forbidden to drive.
I love it.
Isn't that awesome? The acknowledgement that fear might be in the front seat, but it is not going to drive.
That's right. Oh,
and that's another example of what courage looks like. You know, well, you can rehearse that. Well, you can use that as a journal prompt, right?
Absolutely.
And then at the same time, acknowledging that sometimes it's hard to accept so many feelings swirling around us right now. And others are, you know, we're catching the fears and anxieties of others, which is another reason to kind of limit your news consumption to a healthy level. You know, one of my favorite expressions when I teach conflict management is you don't have to come to every argument you're invited to. So somebody else is pressing your buttons, you know, you can just say, oh, look at your grief reaction there. You must be suffering from COVID brain that you're trying to, you know, draw me into this argument or this unproductive interaction. I love Chris's 3 questions, and that's why we put this in again. Keep returning to the 3 key questions to help you clarify what you're feeling, what is possible, what you can do, what isn't reasonable. And these are very powerful ways to increase your resilience. And then, Khris, do you want to talk a little bit about the open broken heart? Or
I'm just going to talk very briefly because I want to give us our time for questions.
Me too.
But I think the main point I want to make is that part of our choice in the way we grieve and the way we carry our grief is whether or not we will simply be broken or whether we will really allow ourselves to be broken open. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that we will allow ourselves fully the experience of loss, enough so that that carved place in us opens. Yeah. And it opens to possibility. It opens to new ways of being in the world. It opens to new compassion. And it opens to reveal, I think, that love that is underneath all of these painful places. Yeah. That really is the strength and the great love that is holding all of this. All of this. Yeah. And my experience has been that when we don't allow ourselves to really be broken open fully, yeah, we don't get there. Yeah, I would agree. We stop at the pain and the bitterness. Yep. That's it.
We get stuck there. Mm-hmm.
You know, Carl Rogers said, and it's something that just really has spoken to me for years. He said that until we have fully explored the feelings in response to a given situation, we're unable to move to a new state of being.
That makes sense to me. That makes perfect sense.
So I decide to skip all this grief stuff.
Yeah.
I'm
And
not,
just go back to the way everything was and pretend like I'm fine.
we
It
can't,
doesn't.
it's going to rear its head one way or the other.
Well, and this
So-
echoes the work of, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say this echoes the work of Brene Brown too on vulnerability, who might be a powerful resource to our webinar buddies here. Brene Brown's research shows that if you cut yourself off from the lows of life, you also cut yourself off from the highs because you become deadened inside. So this is part of what we mean by the broken open heart. And think about, I mean, well, this might move us into gratitude, but Khris and I thought it was important to say that accepting what is not the same as resignation. You know, I hung up for years this quote over my desk that said, I argue with reality. Okay, think about that. I argue with reality, but I only lose 100% of the time.
It's true.
Because it is what it is. That's Byron Katie said that. And acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It means understanding that it is what it is, and there's got to be a way through it. And I think if we can model that for our friends, families, children, we've actually given them quite a gift in the midst of this mess, you know? And one way to do that is to keep modeling gratitude, because no matter how bad things are, there's always things to be grateful for. Sometimes they're small, but they're very real. And this is an opportunity for all of us to really build our gratitude practice like a muscle, to exercise it, and just stop and say, you know, thank you for the sun today. Thank you for the things peeping up out of the ground. Thank you for the blooms. Thank you for asking for that, honey, in such a nice way. Thank you for requesting that in a respectful tone of voice instead of whining. You know,
Thank you that I can breathe freely as we look at people.
right.
Breath.
And then this is where social media has been so inspiring to me. The way people are bringing their wit and their sense of humor,
Yes.
and their desire to lift one another up with encouraging words, and the way healthcare people and essential workers are just out there every day for the good of the rest of us. You know, there's always something to be thankful for. And this brings us joy. Maybe not yippee yippee sing kumbaya type joy, but that kind of deep, quiet joy that really is the most lasting kind. So this is our last slide, that every thought is a seed. And if you plant crab apples, don't count on harvesting golden delicious.
Amen to that.
Amen, right? Amen. So, Sister Estelle, I think we're ready for questions now.
That's great. Thank you so much. We've had a lot of people writing in to thank you. They're grasping onto every word. That's from Jessica. Anita says, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. So we have a lot of thankful people on the other end. So thanks to both of you. We do have some great questions here.
Good.
Janie Cook, who's one of our great friends, she did a wonderful DVD with Khris Ford, which is Through Loss to Life. And that is a Paraclete. You can get that at Paraclete Press, Through Loss to Life. And I'm going to ask Janie's question. And then Khris, I'd love you to just talk a little bit about Through Loss to Life and how you and Janie came to do that project together.
Sure.
Janie's asking a little bit, can you say something about blame and our society's tendency to immediately leap to want to know whose fault this is?
Oh, that's so good.
Well, what I would say is that in our struggle to make meaning, to try to explain what's happening, unfortunately, what often comes forth is blame.
Yeah.
Because if I can blame it on someone and something in particular that is done or not done, then I'm also more in control. And I can know that if that doesn't get done or undone again, then we won't be back here in the same place.
Yeah.
So a lot of it comes out of that need to control and that need to explain. What else, Kim?
Yeah. Well, I have a quote that I like, and I remonstrate with myself using it, which is, no wonder people reach so quickly for anger when behind most anger is fear, and who wants to feel that? So it's a lot easier to judge and criticize than to have a broken open heart, right? So people try to insulate themselves, me too, sometimes on a bad day, insulate ourselves from pain by striking out. And that's why if you have people like that in your life, it can really help to just kind of hold them at arm's length and say, I don't mean hold the person at arm's length, the experience of being struck at or the judgment, and say, wow, look at you. Like, you must really be in a lot of pain that you have said such an ugly thing.
Yeah.
At least that helps me not retaliate or not get right down like to their 4-year-old level,
Yep. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the other question from Janie, which is, what is the impact of losing the ability to touch? And we were just talking about that in our family last night. And so I'd love to hear what you two both have to say about that.
Oh my.
Yeah.
I almost want to tear up with that question because I do live alone. And so that means that there hasn't been any touch
Yeah.
in about 6 weeks. And it really is important in our lives. I do have a dog. We don't call him a dog in our house. We call them canine Americans. But so I do get to hold, and he licks me.
Yeah.
But what the impact is, I do think that we're going to be living with that for a while.
Yeah.
I wish I knew what the long-term impact would be. I do know that we know that in babies and in children, that when they are not touched and held as young people, that their way of attaching is changed.
Right.
There's even a
Failure to thrive.
Failure to thrive.
Right.
And so my guess is that in some way, we are going to be experiencing some failure in life for a while until we can fill that up again.
Yeah.
I think skin hunger is a real thing. I've read that people have done research on skin hunger, and that's why I think part of resilience is being kind to yourself. Take a bubble bath, sit in the sunshine, give yourself a hug, get your hands in the ground, other kinds of touch. When we don't have hugs from our loved ones, I think we can do other things for ourselves.
Interesting. That's
I'm
great.
wondering, doing things like sculpting and really sensory might be helpful.
Painting, maybe crochet, knitting, quilting. I think all those things would be.
I'm going to get busy with clay, I think.
Awesome. That's great. So do you mind, Khris, telling us quickly about your, well, you don't have to be quick about it if you don't want to, but your amazing project, Through Loss to Life. Khris, just if you're just coming on after you missed the introduction, Khris has done 3 different wonderful projects with us. The first one is Helping Parents Grieve, and that is a DVD with Paula D'Arcy, and Helping Children Grieve, also with Paula D'Arcy. And then most recently with Janie Cook, which is Through Loss to Life, Remembering, Reshaping, Reimagining a Spiritually Based Approach to Grief Support. If you could just tell us a little bit about that.
I would love to. So this is about a 2.5-year project, I think, Janie, and I started working on it about that long ago. And we did because my work and Janie's work at Austin Center for Grief and Loss, one of the things that we heard often was that people had attended grief video series and so on at their churches, and sometimes didn't have the best experience or the best take on the theology and the program. And it concerned us a lot. Places of worship and community centers are often where people go to be a part of a support group. And we really wanted something that would reflect what we believe about grief and loss. The other piece of it is that we also recognize that to really be effective in leading a grief group, it's helpful to have a little bit of training. It's a wonderful experience, and it also requires you to know a little bit about what it is to grieve if you've not been through it yourself. And sometimes those training courses that go with programs can be rather expensive. And so what we wanted was to bring to life a program that combined both a book that would help a facilitator take them right through an 8-week grief support program and a training program. So the DVD is a 8-segment training program, and the book then is the curriculum itself, which also can be done by an individual. If you're not somebody who gravitates to groups, which I know everybody is not, you really could take that book and work through it on your own. Although I will have to say that I lean toward the group just because I know how much wisdom and how wonderful it is to know that you're not alone in your experiences, which often happens when you participate in that group. But I really would encourage those of you who have faith communities that you're associated with, or even a social community that you're associated with that might be interested in coming together to grieve, that this is a great tool. And we're excited to have it out there for you.
Oh, that's great. And thank you. I mean, we, on behalf of Paraclete Press, we can't thank you enough. It's just something that we've been needing for a long time. And we've had so many churches and DREs and pastoral associates and social workers asking us if we had anything like this. And now we do. And we're so grateful. Thank you so much.
Great to hear.
That's great. And we had Brad, he said, and I think this is about Through Loss to Life. He said, did your faith assist in this process?
Oh my goodness, yes. I don't know that I would be where I am today or who I am today if my faith had not been an anchor in the midst of both of these huge losses in my life. Absolutely. And it's something that I always want to be able to share with others, and realize that we have to share that in so many different ways in order that no matter where people are and they're looking at a higher power and being with a higher power, that they're willing to be open to that. So thanks for asking that question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Khris. We have a anonymous attendee saying, how do you manage COVID-19 grief while living with someone who is not validating your feelings?
You want to start with that, Kim?
Yeah, that came up a lot when I was interviewing people for Send My Roots Rain, because we know from the research that there's some differences, and I don't want to make men and women sound like different species, because I think that can be overdone. There are some differences between some men and women in the way they grieve, and there are absolutely differences in how different members of a family grieve. So one sibling might not want to talk about it, they're grieving internally, and the other sibling is desperate to process their feelings with them. So what do? I say you find somebody else. If you are somebody who wants to talk about your grief, with someone who gets it, then one of your resilience actions is to find out who that might be. It might be a grief counselor, might be a support group, a healthy one. If you go to a support group and it doesn't feel healthy to you, then trust your gut and look for a different one.
Yeah.
It could be a spiritual director. I always recommend that somebody find somebody that knows something about grief, though. Sometimes, sometimes you go to somebody who's like nice, but they don't really understand the grief process. And so they're more inclined to give you a pep talk than to be really helpful. Would you agree with that, Khris? I know I've had people come to me and say, like, people are saying, be strong, that's not helpful. So you have to be discerning in who you might go to.
Right.
But that's where boundaries come in. You can say to that other person, I'm sorry you feel that way, or I'm sorry you think I'm too emotional about this, or whatever it is. And I don't feel that way. And I don't have to keep asking you for what you can't give. So I won't keep coming back to you with this, but I am going to find somebody I can talk to about this. Those are off the top of my head thoughts. Khris, what do you?
I think, first of all, just to go, the last thing you just said, I think is so important. Don't let go of what is real for you just because it's not being affirmed by the other person. It is real for you.
Yes, right.
And it is important for you to grieve that. But again, I agree with Kim, find someone who can hear you. And maybe you have a good friend that you could have a phone conversation with about this. Also journaling.
Yes.
Do some journaling. And I will tell you that if you go on the web right now, there are so many wonderful articles about grief and this pandemic that
Mhm.
will affirm you.
Yes.
Not that you need to put it in front of the person who's not affirming you,
Right.
but simply to affirm yourself. So there is a lot out there to affirm what's going on for you.
And
Yeah.
remember, we don't have to prove the rightness of our position to anyone.
No,
You know, that's not our job. Our job is to manage our own feelings in mentally healthiest way we know. And we don't have to convince others of the rightness of our position.
sure
Yeah.
helps that they're there.
It does. We all know that.
Kim, I'd love you just to share a bit about your awesome book, Send My Roots Rain, because this I know it was a journey for you to write this incredible book. And
It was.
just to let everyone know, we quickly sold out of the first printing of this book. It's been a huge help. I know, Kim, working with you, that we've gotten it to diocese. You've gone and done some wonderful events, and meaningful discussion has come out of this. So can you share a bit about it and how you came to
Sure.
write it?
Well, you know, I'm a speaker and trainer by profession. So, and I do a lot of work in healthcare and with helping professionals. So when I was asked to submit a proposal, I really wanted to write it for both audiences of individual grievers and people who work with individual grievers. And I think that's why I've had so many beautiful notes since this pandemic started about people who are using it with, you know, chaplains and funeral directors and so on. But, you know, what is it? Well, my editor at Paraclete, John Stewart, who is him, or I
John
just said
Sweeney.
Stewart. I just said John Stewart, which is hilarious. That's an
Yeah.
example of grief brain. Not.
You.
He was so kind when he got the manuscript. He said, Kim, you've written a book full of poetry for people who think they don't like poetry. And that was one of the biggest compliments I got, because yes, it does have poems in it, but you don't have to quote like poetry or even get it to find a friend in this book. We vetted about 1,000 poems before we picked the 70 that are in here. And we picked those 70 to reflect all different aspects of the grief experience, the whole range of feelings, the whole range of responses. And the goal was to try and give people words for what they feel. And then at the end of each section are mindful activities. Some of them we actually mentioned today. And there are journal prompts and questions for meditation in the book. So people are using it to open and close grief group support circles. I've had a bunch of notes like that. People are using it by themselves to provide prompts for their journals. And it was supposed to take me a year to write it. It took me 4 years to write it. And I had beautiful help from people I interviewed and friends who were beta readers. I mean, it's very crowdsourced in the sense that there's a lot of wisdom in it that didn't just come from my experience. So it was one of the big spiritual experiences of my life, no kidding.
Yeah.
Even though we tried to make it a book that's extremely inclusive, like it's a deeply spiritual book, but it doesn't adhere to only one tradition because we wanted it to be useful for professionals.
Right. It's great. I mean, I would recommend to anyone to get your hands on these resources, because they're just terrific, and I know they'll help you. I'm sorry, everybody. I wish we could answer everyone's questions. I wish we had a little bit more time, but we're up against another webinar happening at 4:30 today. So I think this might be a good time to just close. But I really want to thank you so much for your insights, Khris and Kim. You've given us really food for our journey, tools to put in our toolkit, and we're just so grateful.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was great working with you. And I know the two of you, you should do something together in the future, because you have a great chemistry.
We found out we're kindred spirits. That was, you know, another example of a hidden blessing that comes out of our conversation.
Right. That's right. And thank you too to everyone who joined us. So just to mention one more time, Khris's DVDs, Through Loss to Life, Helping Parents Grieve and Helping Children Grieve, and Kim's book, Send My Roots Rain, are available from our website, paracletepress.com, and they're 20% off today. And free shipping is available this month on orders over $45. So please consider gifting their resources to family and friends. Your generosity is going to help support our authors as well as Paraclete Press and in our ongoing work in providing free webinars such as this at this time. We hope you enjoyed this talk as much as we did. Our prayers are with all of you for health and safety, and we hope you'll join us for more of these times together with our authors. Our calendar of Zoom events is available on our website, paracletepress.com. Khris and Kim, can you leave us with some final thoughts?
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead, Khris. Your wonderful quote by Eddie Hillesum.
Yes. So Eddie Hillesum says, "We have embraced a new reality and everything has taken on new colors. There now flows a constant stream of tenderness, a stream in which all petty desires seem to have been extinguished. All that matters now is that we be kind to each other with all the goodness that is in us."
Love that. And I'd like to close with words by American poet Lucille Clifton, who wrote a poem called "Blessing the Boats." May the tide that is entering even now, the lip of your understanding, carry you out beyond the face of fear. May you kiss the wind, then turn from it, certain it will love your back. May you open your eyes to water, water waving everywhere forever. And may you in your innocence sail through this to that.
Good
Thank
afternoon.
God bless you all.
Bye, everybody. Stay
Bye-bye.
well.